For most of my life, I've been involved in doing things for religious organisations, first as an Anglican and then latterly within the Quaker movement. But particularly in the last 8 years, I've found the space, since I retired early from teaching, I've found the space to do work for the Quakers, for the Religious Society of Friends, and also to try and do work in the community. I found that when I retired, I looked round for things to do, and people said, don't rush into things, take your time. People will want you to do all sorts of things. But inevitably, I found that things started to come along. People started to make suggestions, or I became aware of possibilities of how I could fill my time. One of the things that came along first, which really surprised me, was a request from our local Quaker group to be a governor in a Quaker-founded special school. This came quite out of the blue. I'd not really thought about doing this before. Although I'd been a teacher for most of my working life, my teaching had been with mainstream boys and girls in an 11 to 18 high school. I knew very little about special schools. But I felt it was right to investigate it, and I went along to find out about what it would involve. And it became very clear to me as soon as I got into the school and met people who were working there that this was something that I ought to do, that it would be right for me to follow this through. And for the last 4 years I've been the chair of governors of this school and become very involved in its activities, and have found that this is most rewarding. I'm quite clear that responding to the invitation to be a governor at this school was a response to the leadings of God. Another thing that came along fairly early on was a response to an advert in the local paper. A new youth offending team had been set up in Runcorn and Warrington, and they were looking for volunteers to work with young offenders. And as soon as I read this, it seemed to me that this was something that I might do. While I was a teacher for about 17 of the years that I taught, I was a pastoral year tutor and had spent a lot of time working with young people, helping them to sort out their problems, working with their parents and things like that. And so it seemed that it might well be something that I could make a contribution towards. I investigated it and was taken on as a volunteer. I was rather apprehensive about doing this work. I'd not had any dealings with young offenders. Would I be able to communicate with them and with their families? I was concerned about the strong emotions that might surround young offenders and the things that they'd done. Would I be able to cope with that? Would I have the wisdom to help young people sort themselves out and help them to become responsible members of the community? Well, I acted in faith. It seemed the right thing to do. And I found, as so many people have found in the past, that when you're given a task to do, when it's something that you ought to do, that along with that task comes the ability, the wherewithal to do it properly and to do it well. And I've found great fulfilment in doing that kind of work. As well as things like that, inevitably when you retire early, the Quaker community finds you things to do. We're always short of volunteers to do all the jobs that needs to be done. At first I was asked to be area meeting clerk, which I did for 4 years, and found that a great joy, even though it was quite demanding at times. And now I'm area meeting treasurer, which again I quite enjoy apart from when I've got to do the accounts. But it's right to use my abilities and gifts in the service of the Quaker community. One thing again that I've learnt since I retired is that sometimes you're led to do things, if you're faithful and try to align yourself with the activity of God, you're led to do things which are not particularly congenial to you, things that you wouldn't have chosen for yourself. For me, it's working on my local meeting's property committee. I hate that sort of work. I'm really not interested in trees and drains and the fact that last week someone pinched our ornamental gate that leads into the meeting house, and I've got to sort that out with the local police and things like that. And yet being led to do that kind of work was right. I've got abilities that can be used by that committee, and I've got the time to do certain things. And I've learned from that it would be immature, it would be childish to expect that we're only led to do things that are congenial, things that will give us immediate pleasure or satisfaction. We have to do what we're led to do. A phrase that I've carried from my Anglican days into my Quaker faith is a phrase from the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, and it describes God as the one whom to serve is perfect freedom. I like that phrase, whom to serve is perfect freedom, and I've found it's true in practice that if we are faithful, if we are responsive to the leadings of God, that we're given tasks to do that can be really useful in the community, in our religious group, and useful to ourselves. It enables us to be the kind of people that we're supposed to be, free to be ourselves.